Hi everyone, happy Monday. You're probably going to hear me say that a couple times like it's an echo or something, but you know, as it always goes, I do the whole video and then I'm like, I need to go and put in a little clip before the actual video starts with the things that I've learned in the past hour recording this video. So some of the things I say at the start of this video are funny because I say it's only going to be 20 or 30 minutes long, and it's not. It is an hour. However, there is a ton of information in this video. I did not want to cut it down because I realized if I did that, this series would be 5 to 10 parts long. And I don't want to do that because I feel like if you are trying to look at if you're wanting to invest in alcohol markers, you want all that knowledge like right now. You don't want to wait 10 weeks to hear everything. You know, like you want all that tips and all that information, you know, within a reasonable amount of time, right? So I'm not going to cut this down. I am, however, going to split it into chapters. So two things, I'm going to split it into chapters. So in the description, there will be where you can click on the chapter, like the time, and it'll jump to that section. So if you don't want to watch the whole video, that's cool. I usually always offer that, but I realize everybody's time is limited, so maybe you only need a certain section, and that's fine, that's cool. You can also watch some of it and then come back later and finish it up. The other thing I'm going to do, so I joke because I actually did go to school to be a certified high school teacher, and that didn't work out. However, the teacher blood still runs within me, and I actually created kind of a script of sorts, like a bulleted list of things that I cover, that I'm going to cover in this video and I'm going to cover in part 2. I'm going to make this available on Google Docs as a shareable link in the description. I do cover a lot of information in this video, so this way you guys can look at can see it in note form of sorts. So I've done all the note taking for you. This is not a PowerPoint, at least. So, but we only covered, I think, to here. So I think I'm just going to put part 1 in here and then I'll finish it out because I'll need to add some stuff for part 2. But this video does cover a lot of information. It is talking about alcohol markers, why you would want to use them in coloring, the different types of alcohol markers, price ranges for if you were, for example, looking for a set of 100 markers, tips on purchasing markers if you're brand new to it. This is, of course, all alcohol marker. And then we cover my 5 like main marker question musts. Like if I get a pack of markers, there are 5 different things that I need to figure out about this set of markers before I decide if they're really for me or not. So that's what we're covering today. Hopefully it is helpful. And I'll ask it a couple times in the video, but anything I don't cover today, if you have a question that you want me to answer, if you or anything in particular, let me know in the comments. I'm going to post part 2. I've decided part 2 will be a week from today. It will be on August 28th. And part 2 is going to be me actually showing how I color with markers. So we're going to be getting into these books. I'm going to have CaliArt, Ohuhu, and Arctic's brand new sets. I'm going to have my Magic Box markers, which we're going to consider budget markers. I'm going to have Copic's, an expensive set, and I'm going to show how they color, probably at least on Amazon paper, if not another, you know, better paper, standard Amazon paper, how they do. And I'm also going to show you guys how I actually do color with the markers. And so that's going to be more of a demo video. But one question I do cover in that as well is going to be, hey, I bought a set of budget markers. I've been practicing with them, but they're causing me a lot of issues with streaking and stuff. is there anything I can do with them to, use them up, but like get a smoother coloring experience? I have some tips on that I want to share. And as you watch the video, you'll understand a lot more of what that means if you don't already. But yeah, if there are any other questions like that, let me know, and we will cover those in part 2. And yeah, I'm not going to have time to film that before Wednesday, so we're just going to say the following Monday. But I really hope this is helpful. I think this is going to be useful if you're just starting out with markers, alcohol markers. I got to keep saying that, alcohol markers, and you're unsure about what to buy, you're unsure what the different terms mean, and what I've learned over time what I've learned over time works for me with markers and what doesn't. But as another disclaimer I'll put here, of course, all of this is my opinion. And only because I've been using these markers for 5 years consistently. These are not the end all be all of tips and tricks out there. There are people that are probably going to disagree with me, maybe in how I range the price ranges and what I recommend in terms of marker use. And that's okay. That's totally cool. But this is just from my perspective and what I've learned. Hopefully this is helpful. And if it is, let me know in the comments. If it's not, I guess let me know, but just do it nicely, please. And yeah, so let's get this train rolling, and I hope you guys enjoy. Hi everyone, happy Monday. Hopefully this is the first installment of a series of videos that I got an idea to do, and I hope these videos are helpful for everyone, not just people new to each of these mediums, but maybe people that have been using them for a while. Maybe there's something in these videos that will help you. So just a quick disclaimer. Well, first of all, I am by no means an expert, and I don't consider this like just a beginner series, but like just a tips and tricks more so. So apologize if you can hear something in the background. My neighbor is doing something weird outside. Not weird, just making noise. This one, so I'm calling these the Coloring Tips and Tricks series. We're going to do different mediums. This first one's going to be alcohol markers. I know we're still in watercolor summer. However, I've seen a lot of people recently just starting with alcohol markers, and I know some of them have had some frustrations about them, have had some questions about them. I am by no means an expert colorist or an expert colorist with markers. However, I have been coloring with them for 5 years. My first real love, I used pencils, but it really didn't click for me fully until I started using alcohol markers when I first started coloring. And my go-to ultimate comfort coloring right now is using alcohol markers. So they are my most loved coloring medium, so I figured I could share some of the things I've learned over the years, a little bit of a breakdown about alcohol markers. Little disclaimer before we get started, again, by no means an expert. Anything I show you guys, I call it a demo. I don't call it a tutorial because, and I know I'm probably being hard on myself, I just don't feel like I'm expert level enough to be tutoring anyone on how to use anything. So anything I'm showing you is going to be a demo, and it's going to just be the way I color. Everybody colors differently, but the only way I can show you guys how to use marker is just to show you how I use it, and hopefully if it works for you, great. If not, there's plenty of other colorists out there that have different tips and strategies that one may be more comfortable to you. And easier to use. Now, I'll also say all these tips and tricks are not all encompassing. There are things that I've probably left off this list This was kind of a brain dump onto, I have sort of a script, like that's how seriously I'm trying to take this. So I know there's some things I've left off here that I'll probably think about. And this is going to be at least a two-parter for alcohol markers. So one thing that would help is what I don't cover in this video. If you have any questions about alcohol markers that you think I could provide at least my experiences with, or provide, somewhat of an answer if I can find one, please ask them in the comments and I will address them. My hope is to have part 2 up Tuesday or Wednesday following this video. So if you can just within that first day, and if I don't catch them then I'll just do another video if there are a lot of questions. So this is very flexible, very flux. I'm trying to be very casual about this. Plus, I also want to keep these fairly short, 20 to 30 minutes, thus why we will have multiple parts. All right, I think that's everything I needed to cover to begin with. So, alcohol markers for coloring. So, what is considered an alcohol marker? So, when it comes to markers, you have different types. You have water-based markers. This is where, and this is a very dirty water-based marker. I don't know why I picked this one, but these are your Crayola super tip markers, your Tombows, if you've heard of those before. Those are water-based markers. Any watercolor marker like an Arteza Real Brush pen or anything would be a water-based marker. This is where some type of pigment is mixed with water, and I'm sure other ingredients to create the marker. Then you have alcohol-based markers, art markers like a Copic, I know Hoo-Hoo, a Cali Art, that are pigment blended with like a rubbing alcohol, it might actually be rubbing alcohol, I don't know, some sort of alcohol mixed with ink and pigment. And a permanent marker, though, keep in mind, alcohol markers, all alcohol markers are permanent markers. They're not going anywhere. I mean, you can introduce well, I say that they're permanent to a point that there's different solvents apparently you can introduce to move these around, but for the most part they are just permanent and in place. However, if you've heard of permanent markers, you might be thinking of a Sharpie or a Bic Intensity, and typically these also have alcohol and pigment, but they also have solvents like ethylene glycol or something like that mixed in with them as well. And that solvent is typically what gives these such a sharp, strong smell. You can still get an alcohol smell out of other alcohol markers, but your Sharpies are going to have a stronger smell typically than your standard alcohol markers. Now, alcohol markers are a little scary, particularly to use in coloring books. And you might be like, why would you want to use them? And while I'm talking about what they're useful for, I'm going to show you a few pictures where I've used them. First off, they're really quick to dry. This is from the intro 50 Lovely Gnomes. I actually use my Copics on this one, even though it's Amazon paper. I splurged and used my Copics on those, and we'll talk about why that's a unique thing to use on Amazon paper here in a little bit. Hopefully you don't see any bruises on my arms. Those are from where I went to the ER and the woman absolutely brutalized me. Not literally beating me, but she was not well versed in getting blood out of me. So here's marker and gel pen, just marker and gel pen. They're very quick to dry. When you put them on the paper, because of the alcohol in them, they dry really, really quickly. That is an advantage and a disadvantage we'll talk about in a little while. They're able to blend and layer. Again, just keep in mind, this is also very paper dependent. You kind of have to have a ideal paper and marker situation to get any blending, but from 50 Spring Miniatures. Here is one where I did some blending on the grass, and you can see it on the cat a little bit. They're easy to blend and layer. You get more of a smooth look as opposed to like a water-based marker. You may get a few more streaks. Alcohol markers can streak as well, so we'll talk about that in a little while, but typically you get a smoother look, especially on certain types of paper with the alcohol marker than you do the water-based marker. You get a smoother, vibrant color, just like I was talking about. This is from Enchanted Halloween. This is all alcohol marker, and it looks like a little bit of stickles maybe thrown in there. But this is all alcohol marker. I can't remember which ones I used, but it would help if I brought it up so you could see. But she is one of my favorites. She came out so well. They're just so vibrant. If you enjoy bright pops of color, and even if you enjoy more neutral or pastel type pictures, there's also sets you can buy that have more like a neutral skin tone marker or pastel markers as well, and we're going to see some of those probably in part 2. Maybe, yeah, it's going to be part 2 because we're running along here. I'll show you another one. Now what I'm showing you is all on Amazon paper, by the way. I did do some blending here and then some outlining in gel pen. Okay, we're going to bring this down because otherwise you're going to see half of everything because I'm going to forget. One thing too, if you have hand, arm, wrist issues, if you have trouble being able to color with heavy pressure using pencil or using pencil for long periods of time, using markers can save you a lot of time and effort using them as a base layer. So like from Matchstick Mouse, a floral coloring book, I did this picture. I based this in alcohol marker. Where'd it go? And then I actually went over it with pastel pencils, which are also an easier alternative to colored pencils that I'll talk about later. But what that base layer does is just gives you an initial layer to build on, so you don't have to use as heavy a pressure with your pencils. You don't have to use as much pencil because you can let the base layer come through. And Amazon paper, if you're in any way familiar with it, or if you're not, is a very toothy, lower weight paper, and so most pencils, unless you apply a lot of pressure and a lot of layers, are going to have some of the white or the tooth show through on the paper. And I personally, it drives me nuts when that happens. So that base layer of marker eliminates that from happening, and so it keeps you from having to fully use pencils. Couple more and then we're going to move on because I can use these at any point. So that was all marker. Usually it's marker and a little bit of gel pen for me. That is also marker. One more I want to show you that uses where I'm talking about using it as a base layer. This is 80s adult coloring book from Joshua Dunbar. This was a fantastic picture, still one of my favorites to this day. I did last year. It is all marker base with the pastel pencil on top, and just look how fun and vibrant that is. And you can even use markers for detail work. I know they're a bit scary because they can bleed on certain types of paper, but if you use certain types of markers and you have a little bit of patience, you can in fact get really good results in tiny areas. This is from George Tufexis. This is his Spectacular Spring Scenes. And I'll show you how I get those results as well. So, alright. So we're at 12-minute mark, so we're going to move on. So there's different types of alcohol markers like we were talking about. We have, don't confuse regular artist alcohol markers have alcohol and the ink, the pigment ink. Sharpies, permanent markers have that, and also some type of solvent in them as well. And both can be utilized here, and we can talk about them, but just keep in mind they are slightly different in regards to that. And again, don't confuse these with water-based markers either. Water-based are more reactive to water, like if you add water drops to them, or if you're trying to use watercolor or something around them in a picture, they're going to react to that extra water. If it touches it, the alcohol marker is going to be less reactive. It might still smudge a bit, but it's, how are we doing on light? It is too bright in one spot, not bright enough in the other. That's typically how this goes. So, types of alcohol markers. Let me see what I can pull out here. So you also have different types of the artist grade alcohol markers. If you're trying to figure out what you want, hopefully this will be helpful. All right. So your typical artist alcohol markers are going to have three types of tips. You're going to have a chisel tip, a fine tip, and a brush tip. And so this is a marker that is a chisel tip and a bullet fine tip. It's the same thing basically, but your chisel tip looks like this. It's like just a kind of triangle. I don't know what shape that's supposed to be. And then, and typically in the chisel tip you have kind of like one side where it's beveled a little bit, and then the other side's like a straight line. They're not all like that, like this one's beveled on both sides, but your higher grade ones will have a chisel with so you can create a variety of lines with it if need be. Then you have your fine or your bullet point tip. You also have brushes that come with a brush tip and a chisel tip. These are my favorites, but I don't necessarily recommend these for people just starting out, and I'll explain why later. And then this also comes with a chisel tip on the other side. This is a Weisbrandt marker, which they're not selling right now, and we're going to talk about that. Some of them come with a brush tip and a bullet tip or fine point. I don't have one of those, but like this Copic is a Copic sketch. So definitely when you're looking at markers, always check to see what they have on the ends. You also have like your basic marker versus your slimline brand, which is fairly new. These are obviously smaller markers than your standard size. They usually come with a tiny little chisel tip and a fine tip, bullet tip. This is even more fine than what you get in the broad markers. So you can get a huge variety based on your needs. Like if you enjoy small little areas, like fine details in pictures like mandalas, or like the George Tufexis book I was showing you, these slimline markers are really nice. If you prefer covering large areas like backgrounds and large areas in pictures with marker, your chisel tip or your brush tip, if you've gotten used to it, are good for big areas like that. And then again, for detail, you have your bullet point fine tip in these markers. So all right, so we're going to talk a bit about price. So with those markers, like I said, if you're just starting out, what I would say is if you like mandalas, if you like fine areas, if you're really worried about marker bleed and you're going to, just fill in small areas to begin with, go with this fine tip. If you really like mandalas and small little details, I would consider a slimline brand of marker. If you need to cover large areas, I would say the chisel tip. If you're trying to play with blending, I would say the brush tip, but the brush tip I also use for large areas as well, but that takes some practice to get used to. I'll be honest, I didn't even like brush tips till about 3 years into the 5 years. Like, it took a long time for me to get to the point I liked brush tips. And you can blend with chisel. I've never been able to blend with the fine point, but you can blend with the chisel tip, but it's real, you got to be kind of aggressive with it. And I'll show you some examples of that too. All right, so there is a huge variety of marker sets out there, and they're all in different price ranges. So like, what I consider mid-range markers, if you buy a smaller set, they're going to be maybe in the budget price range. So there's a whole lot of different ways to look at this. So the way I'm going to break it down in terms of price is going to be, if I was looking for a set of 100 markers, let's say I'm serious about coloring and I want a good variety of markers to choose from, like colors, and I'm going to look at a 100 marker set. So based on that alone, what I would call the budget level markers are typically going to run you, I would say $20 to $40, but we'll say 0 to 40, but they're typically going to run you 20 to 40. And what these typically look like are your big 100 marker sets, your big 120 sets of brands that you don't particularly recognize. Oops, sorry. Now I'm making a bunch of noise. I have a good example of this. These are, they're called Kingsbury markers on Amazon. They come in a box named Magic Box. And the markers have touch cocoa on them. So there's 3 different names associated with these markers. I call them Magic Box markers because of the box. Now, these are like $40 for 120, and they come in this really nice case. Like, I will use this case long after these markers are gone. And you get a big color variety. These are chisel and fine tip. There's like the color swatch for them. These are useful, like some of the colors are very similar. But with the budget markers, they tend to, I find, have less pigment in them and more alcohol, which means they dry even faster on paper. So if you get one of these sets, just be aware that these are probably going to have less overall ink in them, so they're going to dry out faster. The marker itself is going to go dead and dry out faster. Your ink is probably going to dry faster on your paper. You may wind up with streaks. You may wind up with, like, it's dried and you go back over it and it creates a darker line, like that kind of setup. I do run into that problem with these markers. I loved them to begin with, and then I started having that problem. And so we're going to talk about that. But just keep in mind, if you find a really good deal on like a big set of markers that have they have different names to them, and they're not always consistent names, then they would fall into this category. If they're under $40 for like 120 markers or something, they're not typically going to be open stock, and we'll talk about what that means in a minute. Meaning, if you run out of colors, you would have to buy a whole nother box set to replace them. I put shuttle art in this category too, and because of some reasons we're going to talk about in a minute, but when I looked at their 100 set, it was under the 40 mark. So I do put shuttle art in this category as well. And those are, I feel like, a good deal if you're just practicing, but we're going to talk about the limitations of the budget markers here in a minute. And that's probably, where are we at in time? Yeah, that's probably where we're going to wrap up this one. And then we'll pick up with part 2 because I am not pacing very well here. All right. So your mid-price, these are ones that run from $40 to $60 for 100 set. These are the towel trees, typically run $30 to $40. There's 101 in them. I know this bag's dirty. I would consider the Towel Tree Slimline in that category. I do have this is not 100 set of Ohuhu, but I'm going to mention Ohuhu falls in what I call mid-range. These have more ink in them. They have a better flow. I feel like these are more the gold standard to use, particularly on lower weight paper like Amazon paper, because of the amount of ink output you get. Less chance to get the lines or streaking. They tend to last longer in storage. That's your Ohuhus, your Cali Arts, which I just bought a set to try, but I've had the 100 set before, and they're, I bought a smaller set, but I'm talking about like the 100 set of these. Your Cali Arts are also a really good choice. What else am I looking at here? Arctics is another brand that's on its way to me that we're going to try. Now keep in mind too, when you're buying, when you are considering your tips and your price range, is your chisel tips and your fine tips are going to be cheaper than any brush tip marker. That's just typically how they run, because chisel tips are a little less popular than brush tips depending on, you know, how people use their markers. So if you're looking for a good deal and you're just starting out, I would certainly go with the chisel and the fine tip markers, because you're going to get a better deal on those. Again, your brush tip sets are going to go a little higher. So these I'm looking at are the chisel and fine tip sets too. So if they have brush tips, they may be more expensive. So again, your Ohuhu, your Cali Art, your Arctics all run $40 to $60 for like 100 set, depending on time of year. Then you have your like what they call artist grade, but I would even call the mid-range. Like I've seen artists using the mid-range ones too. So I would just call these your expensive ones. These are your premium sets. Your Artify markers, Arteza Everblends, I saw it was 100 or 120 for about $70 on Amazon US. Copic, I have the Copic collection myself. Copic's basically considered the gold standard in markers. These are Japanese based markers, so they are expensive to come by. I think they've even went higher recently, just after I bought all of them, and I like them, I use them, but I really only recommend going this route if you are really heavily into marker blending. So if you're using like premium marker paper, you're really into marker blending, and you want markers that will store and last a long time, and you love brush tips, I would say the Copic sketches definitely are worth the investment. But if you're just a casual marker colorist, if you can find these on sale, by all means. I mean, I think they're great. Like, I'm not saying don't buy them, but like if you have other, like, don't feel like you have to buy these unless, like I said, unless you're just at a level you really like blending a marker paper, and these store a long time. And over time, I've really grown to love the brush tip. But you can also get these. So this is brush and chisel, but I'm not sure what other tips you can get. But that's what I was saying. I'm going to talk about them in these videos, but like, just don't feel like you gotta have Copics. The Arteza Everblends, I don't know about the new formula. I think my friend Tammy at Tammy Colors too uses them a lot, and she seems really happy with them. So the new formula of those is really good. And there's others like Prismacolor markers I used to own. I don't have any of the Artify, so I can't speak to those. I've never had those before, but there are some reasons why the markers that are expensive, and we'll talk about that as well. So where are we at? We're at the 27 mark. Okay. So, so tips, you know, kind of to sum that up, tips on purchasing markers. I would say if it were me and I knew then what I know now, what I should have known then. If I was just starting out with markers, I would go with a small set of a mid-range marker. So I would go with a 50 set of like the Ohuhu or the Cali Art or the Arctics, which is why I picked up the Cali Art ones. Like I said, I used to have the 100 set, but formulas can change, and they're like 5 years old. And I love those, but this is just a 40 set of the Cali Arts. And so if I was just starting out and I had no markers, instead of buying the big off-brand, we're just going to call it off-brand, box of 120 markers that have 3 different names to them, or they all look alike or something like that, I would instead, within that same price range, find a smaller set of the mid-range markers. And there's going to be some reasons for that we're going to talk about in a minute. I guess this one's going to run a little long. And as a beginner, I would start out with chisel tips and fine tips until I got more used to using them, because you're going to probably want to use the fine tip first, because the newness of using the marker. The chisel tip is easier to master than the brush tip. And then once you get kind of used to the chisel tip, then you can, start messing around with the brush tip. And then I would say you'd want to move on to like blending and stuff like that. But not only are they easier to learn, but they're cheaper. And if you particularly like really small space coloring, like a George Tufex's color by number, or extremely detailed mandalas, or extremely detailed pictures, I would even look at the slim lines to get that further level of detail. And currently the only 2 I know of are Tao Tree and Ohuhu. So those are kind of my tips on purchasing markers. There are other tips I have we're going to talk about, because I really want to make them part of this video. Before you go click that buy button, or okay, you've purchased your small set to test, like you've done. Do as I say, not as I do, because I tell you, this is certainly not how I went about it. But again, hindsight's 2020. But let's say I buy my Cali Arts, and I'm sorry for the plastic rattling. That's driving me nuts. Let's fix that. So let's say I went and I bought my smaller set of mid-range markers, and I'm wanting to know, why and what do I do with these to ensure that these are good markers before I even before we start considering how to color with them. I have basically 5 marker question must-haves. Like they must pass all these tests. Because I didn't do this, and I started coloring with a bunch of different markers. Then I ran some problems with them, and it caused some damage to my books with this first one. And so I don't want anyone else to run into this. So the first question, the most important question about alcohol markers that I will stress to anyone is, do these yellow over time into the pages around them in a book? So when I say it yellows, basically what I mean is, if I color in a book and I let it dry, I always let my marker pages sit out and dry for at least 24 hours before I close the book. If I open that book back up in the future, will there be a yellowing on the page in front and behind it? Actually, I'm going to show you one that's just really obvious. Where is it? So Caboodles Cuteness Overload. I colored this picture using the original Arteza Everblend markers, and they were pricey markers, but I invested in the full set. I really liked them, gave very pretty vibrant color. I sat here, I fully let it dry before I closed the book. I put it on my shelf, and then come to find out, next time I opened it up, I saw this. And all that red and all that orange had yellowed onto the page in front of it. And it is soaked through so severely that it's on the other side. And it also did it on the back page. So, does it yellow is very important to me. I love coloring in books. I want to be able to store them without having to put any pages in front or behind them. This does not happen with all markers. Now, Sharpies and permanent markers can cause this to happen, particularly black Sharpies. Black markers sometimes can, so keep that in mind. But like, it's really going to be your reds and your oranges. But like, this was pretty severe. The shuttle art markers I mentioned, those are the very first set of markers I bought, and I liked them. They have very bright color, but I noticed over time that they yellowed. Now, if you've already colored the page in front, it may not be noticeable. Some of them soaked so bad you can see through like you did there, but this one you can't see on the page in front of it, but the page behind it. Now, and when I color over it, if these aren't yellowish colors, yellow-based colors, it's going to be noticeable. So what I would recommend is with your 50 set, when you're first starting out, try pages you don't love. Now this one I did heavy blending. Actually, I'm surprised it didn't wind up worse, but I did heavy blending with those Arteza, not the new ones. We'll just say old Artezas, the old Arteza markers. And you can see it happened here as well. Not as much transference there. This is Creative Haven. I put this between it to make it try to take off some of it, and it's still yellowed. So not just budget markers will do this, but what I would say is the first thing I would do is get a practice page in a book. Maybe use the very first page, so just your title page may get it. And I would, if you don't want to lose the page behind it, I would get a thick piece of cardstock that covers the whole page and stick it right here. I would test the markers, let them dry for 24 hours before I close the book, leave that white paper, leave the blotter page in, close the book for a few weeks to a month, and I know that's a length of time, but and then check, because usually that happened pretty quick, within like a week, I would say. Like when I opened pages at my completed pages at the end of the month, they were there. So if it's going to happen, I feel like it happens pretty quickly. But I've never had a mid-range marker do this to me. A Cali Art, an Ohuhu, I've never had do that. The old school Artezas did. I've never had a Copic do it. Now, to be fair, my magic box markers don't do this, but they have other problems. So this is where one of the reasons why I said I think mid-range markers are the ones to really shine for coloring in coloring books right now. And there are other reasons, but that is the biggest thing. If it yellows, it is out. I know people probably cried when I said it, but I just threw the shuttle arts in the garbage. They've been here for 5 years anyway. They were half dried out. And when I found out they were doing that, I was just like, absolutely not. They are garbage. And even if you color on digital printed pages and stuff, you have to be careful, because if you don't put them in a book with like plastic covering them or something like that, they could bleed on other pages. Like if you put them in with a whole bunch of other pages, they could yellow. I say bleed, but I mean yellow on the pages on either side. So be cautious of that no matter what type of paper you're using. But that is just number one rule. Number one check with alcohol markers. If they yellow, they go bye-bye. That is just, I can't handle that, not with coloring in books. I've had so many pages. I may have to buy another Autumn Scenes. I'm going to try to color the pages on either side. Like, I love that one with the cat. But like this one, I'm probably just going to buy a new book. So it's a costly thing, and that's where I'm saying, you know, what may seem like a cheap deal on a marker may cost you more money later if it's ruining your books. So that's the biggest thing. Second does it streak or dry too quickly? This is a big problem I've seen in a lot of people's pages. Where is my, there it is. So this was the other big thing with the budget markers. A lot of times you get them, and as I said, there's not as much pigment in them. There's more alcohol than pigment, and they'll dry even faster. So Amazon paper, there's two things that work against it. The budget markers tend to have more alcohol than pigment, so they dry even faster on the paper. And lower weight paper, in particular, Amazon printed books, which have this little stamp here in the back. And there's different types of Amazon paper, but if it's like the glossy kind of paper, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about just the standard printed paper. Is considered low weight paper. That soaks up the ink and it dries very quickly, which means it pulls a lot of ink out of your markers, and it also dries very quickly on the surface, creating streaks. So you got kind of two things working against you. You can see here I had some markers that were doing really well, but like look here, you see those little lines that happened. That was where the paper dried quicker than I was coloring, thus was leaving the lines. You can see it here on this cat. It's very interesting. You can see where I was using other markers, and then when I started using the magic box markers, as I call them, that one's a really light color, so it's a little hard to see. I was trying to look at just really obvious lines. There's some down here. You can see them like this. So what happens is I'm sitting here coloring, and as I'm going back and forth, like trying to create a smooth surface, it's drying out faster than me coming back through and reapplying it. So it's creating these kinds of lines like this. And I know that can drive people crazy. It's doing it back here. Large spaces in particular. This is, so it can happen in budget markers. It can happen if a marker is nearing the end of its life. That's what was happening here. So, but you can see other ones here are smooth. So it's not something that happens with every marker. And I colored all these the same way. Like I used the same approach, the same way of coloring all these, but yet some of them streaked and some of them didn't. I can tell you right now, these magic box markers are terrible about it, are terrible at drying too fast. They also, some of them seem to run out quicker than the others. So like, that is a big deal to me because I prefer a smoother looking surface. So that's one of the reasons I wouldn't recommend budget level markers, particularly if you're coloring in Amazon books. It also, if they dry too fast, they're harder to blend. The only way you can really create a good blend is if your ink is staying wet. So it also makes it harder to blend. As you can see though from my pictures, it is not impossible to color. All this makes it sound like it's impossible to color smoothly with alcohol markers in Amazon books. And it's just not true. You can. It takes practice. But it's not just practice. Don't beat up on yourself if you're getting those streaks. It may very well be your markers too. So I know some people, I've seen some people get down on themselves thinking like it's their fault. It may not be you. It's probably the marker you're using. So you can get good results. Now, I will say your expensive markers like your Copics too, sometimes can be streaky in Amazon books depending on the paper. The Deborah Moeller picture I just finished, Chubby Witches. I decided to use my Copic Black because I'm having trouble keeping black markers because I constantly run out of them here on the back of this paper. Now, this is a brand new book that I just got from Amazon last week. I had to do 2 or 3 layers of that black to get a smooth black surface. Yet, in this one, I used Copics, and this is a 2001, 2002 page, 2021. I used Copics in this picture, not for all of it, but for the gnomes, and they're fine. I used 1 layer, had absolutely no issue. So another issue here is that Amazon paper changes a lot. And I think there's different levels of Amazon paper other than the glossy paper too. So a lot of it's just going to come down to testing. And that's where, again, your smaller sets are your best bet to really test. Because, like I said, what I'm telling you now about Amazon paper could change in 2 weeks. It could change in 6 months. I'll probably have to do another one of these like 2 or 3 years from now when all the paper changes. So like your expensive markers, so your budget markers don't have a lot of ink, and they don't have a lot of ink to put on the paper. Your medium level markers tend to have, these are not medium level, your Ohuhus and Cali Arts tend to have a whole lot of ink in them. And they output a lot of ink. They're not set up to flow super consistently, so you get a lot of ink output, which makes them honestly ideal for Amazon paper if you want a lot of smooth color at once. It can lead to feathering in your Amazon books, so you have to be careful. But your expensive markers like your Copics tend to have a lot of ink, but they have a better flow, a better output, where they are more smooth and consistent with their flow, which makes them ideal for blending. But sometimes when you get a really low weight paper like this that sucks up a lot of ink, these can also be streaky at times. Again, this is why I stress the medium budget markers, getting a small set. And in my opinion, I feel like that's the best bet, especially if you're wanting to color on Amazon paper. I do have in a part 2 some tips on, let's say you bought like the magic box markers, or you bought one of those big budget markers and you're having a lot of streaky results. We're going to talk about that in part 2, about some of the things you can do. I wouldn't say you have to throw those, I'm not going to tell anybody to throw their markers out. I'm not going to tell anybody how to spend their money. But I will give you some tips on what to do with those if you're still not getting the results you want, but you don't want to get rid of them. So where are we at here? We're at 45 minutes. Oh my goodness. Yeah, this went a lot longer than I thought it would. We should have known that. We should have known that. I do want to finish this 5 thing though, so we'll do that. How easy, so my number 3, so number 1's, do they yellow? Number 2 is how quickly do they dry out? Do they streak? Number 3 is how easy is it to get more of these markers? Some follow-up questions to that could be, how quickly does the marker run out? Are they open stock or refillable markers? And will this brand still be around 6 months from now, a year from now? Inevitably, if you love the markers and you color and color with them, they're not forever lasting, no matter how good they are. They will run out, and then it becomes a question of, can I get more of these, and how do I get more of these? So you get your little set of 40 or 50 Cali Art markers, let's say, for example. These are going to come with a limited number of colors. And me, I always run out of my oranges and my blues and my greens first, just because of the amount I use them. Usually my reds and pinks last, just reds maybe not, but like my pinks, I don't like using pink as much, so I tend to run out of that one a little slower. But inevitably, you buy this set, and black. The black marker, I love to black out backgrounds. They go so quick. So I'm testing these typically, I feel like a marker, if you're using it, you know, for 10 to 20% of the page or whatever, like, you know, I'm not saying you're coloring backgrounds on every single page, but like you're using it to color in grass or color in a shirt or something, like you're just taking your orange and you're using it pretty consistently a lot across a number of pages. Like here, you know, I colored in his shirt, and another one I might use it for, let's say this is that orange, let's use it for those mandalas. I feel like I should get about 10 pages out of this marker before it really starts to give me problems, where it just starts getting streaky and towards the end of its life. That's been where I've tested them in the past. That's my preference. Again, these are all my opinions. That may not be worth it to you. You may want to be able to get more out of the marker. You may be happy if you only get 4 or 5 pages out of the marker. But for me, in terms of price point and quality of marker, and there's reasons for this too, because if all I have is this set, and I love using orange, and I run out of my orange marker, what do I do? Because Cali Arts, as far as I know, are open stock, means you can go and buy a single marker. Means you can buy any color marker, or at least most of the colors of markers, open stock. I could just go buy an orange marker on Amazon or the Cali Art site or somewhere. As far as I know, Cali Art doesn't offer that. So in order to get this, and there's also, are they refillable? Some marker companies like Copic, and Ohuhu is starting to do this, are offering refills of ink, and I should have brought one out to show y'all, that you can take the nib off and actually refill these with ink. That's one of the reasons the Copic sketches are so expensive, because you can buy replacement ink for this and replacement nibs. So like this marker, I mean, you can buy, these are also open stock, but like the most efficient price point is the refillable ink, because the ink you buy can refill these 4 or 5 times. It is messy, it is annoying, they're not marked very well, so you kind of have to make a guess how much you have to add. Not saying this is the case for all of them, but my experience with Copic. But if you use these markers a lot, it's a lot cheaper than buying like whole packs again, or even the individual markers, which I think at this point are running like $7 or $8 a piece. Thanks, imports, I guess. So you can get refillable markers as well. I think Artix does this, and correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. Artix does this, Copic, Ohuhu, and I can't think of any others right now. It's not easy to find refillable markers, but there are some disadvantages to having to do that. If you don't want to fuss with refillable markers, then I would at least want markers that are open stock if I'm coloring a lot in markers, or have a wide variety of markers. Otherwise, Cali Art doesn't offer refillable, it doesn't offer open stock. So to be able to get this orange, I either would have to buy another set of markers that has orange, either buy this same pack, buy the bigger pack, buy, and most of the packs don't come with like 2 oranges. I wish some companies would sell, like, I could buy a pack of 10 oranges, because there's about 5 or 6 colors. Cali Art actually used to offer like 10 of their black markers in a set. I don't know if they still do, but like if I could get 10 oranges or 10 like normal greens, like there's about 10 colors I would just buy multiples of, because I run through them so quick. So you got to decide, like, am I willing to do without this orange? Now, granted, in a bigger set, in 100, 120, 100, 200, 300, you're going to have more oranges to choose from, but they're not all going to be the same orange. So there is that, and that's what you need to consider. Again, with a test pack, you're not going to have multiple colors, multiple same color, but something to consider. And lastly, am I going to be able to buy these 6 months from now? And this is something that I just felt like I learned over the past year. So this is a brand, Wise brand. I love these markers. I know some people don't like them that have tried them, and I feel bad because but I know everybody's experience is different. These are brush tip and chisel tip. I love them. There's a 50 set of them that I feel like are the best budget level markers, and they're a brush tip. It's like a 50 set of them, and they usually ran under 20 bucks. And I use them for color by numbers. I've used them in my regular coloring pages. They're juicy. Their brush tip's great. I blended with them. I wish they made more colors. Like, I just was in love with this set, to be quite honest. And the price point. I can't find these anymore. The only thing I can find is like the acrylic paint markers. Every now and then they'll post them. I guess, I don't know, they sell out quickly or something, but then they don't just consistently make them. So when I run out, then I run into a problem because I can't buy my next set. So with these budget level markers, with, you know, a Wise brand or a Touch Cocoa or Kingsbury or some Temu markers you might buy or something. Are those same markers going to be available? Like, if you run out of colors and you want to buy another set like 6 months from now, are they going to actually have them? Because a lot of times if they run low on stock, if they're the same company making markers under different brands, but they're all the same marker, there may be some, and you don't know that unless you know, right? Some of them, they may not restock because they're running low on supplies, right? Like, so Cali Art has consistently been there over the years. Ohuhu has consistently been there over the years. Arteza, I feel like Artix and Artify might be maybe not new, but not around as long. So I'll be curious to see longer than some of these others. And the Arteza Everblend markers is something to note here as well. I bought the original Arteza Everblend set. They reformulated them and then put them out in a different type of set. I did not buy the new set, however, I have friends that use them and love them, and as far as I know, they don't yellow, but man, that first set yellowed horribly, horribly, as you could see. So you also got to keep in mind they can reformulate these markers at any point too. So I know that's the case with any supply, you got to worry about that. But if you end up loving markers and you want to make sure that the colors you like, maybe the combination of ink and alcohol and like everything about these markers you love, and you want to make sure you can buy these, 6 months down the road, years down the road, you're going to have better luck with a Cali Art Ohuhu, a established brand, than you are like these other off-brands that you have never heard of before. Just for consistency's sake. Now, they may change. I can't guarantee they will never change their formula or anything, or their stuff won't suddenly start yellowing or something like that. But for the most part, from what I've seen, the mid-range and the expensive brands tend to be a lot more consistent over time. So that's something to consider. How long do the markers last in storage? So when you store markers, you always want to store them just like this, horizontally. Never vertically, because you have double tips here and the ink will all run down to one tip. It may leak. The other end will dry out, and if the nib dries out for too long, it can make it hard to get a non-streak color, even though there's still ink in there, just because the nib dried out so much it's hard to refresh it. There are ways you can refresh nibs. There are ways you can create your own ink, but we're not going to talk about them in this length because they seem messy as hell, to be quite honest, and I don't recommend anyone doing that unless you are just really willing to invest the time. If there's any interest in that, I will see what I can research and follow up on in regards to that. But you always want to store them like this, so the best way would be in their original bag. My Copics are in these trays. that I bought from Spectrum Noir. Apologize for my pale ghost arm floating around, but they're little stackable trays like this that you could store markers horizontally. All my markers, water-based, alcohol-based, all my markers I store horizontally. That extends their life very, like, a whole lot. That is the best thing you can do for your markers for long-term storage, is storing them horizontally. But inevitably some markers, particularly the budget markers, and as I've noticed with the Magic Box markers, which I've had about 6 months, some of them dry out faster than the others, even though I store them the way I've stored them. My Shuttle Arts dried out. So you may decide, like, use markers heavily and quickly, and you burn them out. You run through them quickly. So maybe you don't have to worry so much about long-term storage because you're constantly swapping out markers. But if you do love markers and you build up a bit of a collection, like I have Copics, I have Cali Arts, I have the Magic Box, I have different markers for different situations, you may want to make sure that your markers can stand the test of time. The one beauty about the Copic sketch is, yeah, some of them can dry out, but from what I've found, like, some of these markers I've had for probably close to 5 years, and they're still going strong. They just last really well. And so you may not want to give, if you want to invest more in markers, I wouldn't say, like, just hold the sample set for 6 months. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, like, if you do buy a bigger set, if you like the Cali Arts, let's say, and you buy the bigger set, see how they last over 6 months. See how they last every year. I had Cali Arts for over 4 years, and some of them are still going strong. Actually went ahead and like, I had a friend that needed some markers, so I gave them to her because I just had so many I couldn't use them all, and I didn't want them to just dry out and be useless and just sit there. So Cali Arts I know lasts a long time. I have a set of Ohuhu pastels I've had for 2 or 3 years that still work great. So again, it's that mid-range, it's that higher range of markers that are probably going to last longer in storage. So if you need markers that are going to last a while, maybe you prefer to switch back to pencils for a while, and you're not going to, maybe you don't pick up your markers for a couple months. Granted, your markers are going to dry out and faster than any other of your mediums, right? Like, your water-based probably faster than your alcohol ones, but one key there too is to make sure you have really tight caps. So whenever you do use your markers, always make sure the cap clicks and is very secure. If your caps are very loose and they fall off easily, obviously all the alcohol will disappear and they will dry out faster. So always make sure the caps are snug and that you put them back on tightly. And finally, the last thing I can say real quick, and we're going to cap this at an hour, is, are they swatchable with color numbers and names? So typically when you get an alcohol marker, you're going to see a number at the end of it. Some markers will have the name of the color on the marker. Honestly, I prefer that. Like, this one has the B79 there, and then it has it on the caps. I prefer that because if I take both caps off, if I'm using both sides, like I'm blending or something, and I've got 2 or 3 markers in my hands, and I take both caps off, and I'm just swapping them all around, then I go back to put all the markers together, and I'm like, oh no, which caps go with which markers? If it's on the marker, then I can easily match them up. It's not a must-have to be on the marker, but I much prefer it when I'm doing really heavy blending and stuff, and I'm using both sides of the marker. But typically the markers are just going to have the marker colors or names on the caps, which is fine. But I want them to have some type of number, some type of distinguishable feature, because I highly recommend swatching markers. It's a pain. It's annoying. It's not a lot of fun when you just want to get to the coloring page and start coloring. But if you like to color match, or you like using palettes, I can tell you right now that 9 times out of 10, the color that's on the cap is not going to be true to the actual color of the marker. And the only way you're going to really know that G804 is this swatch of color is if you swatch it on a piece of paper. So I do highly recommend swatching, particularly if you like going for specific colors. Now, if you're just pulling markers out of the bag, maybe you're doing a challenge where you pull 5 markers out of the bag and you do a mandala with them, any colors. Not a big deal if those are don't have a number or any sort of distinguishing mark. But let's say I have a color by number and the color by number is calling for a yellow green or a light green. Well, again, I can try to go by the caps, but some of the caps on these look darker than what they are here and vice versa. So what I would do is go to my swatch sheet and I'd be like, hey, I can use 59, I can use 48. Also, what happens if my 59 goes dry, then I can look and see, like, here's a pale green that might work. I could go up and do a slightly darker green if I wanted to. This is more of a yellow than a green, but maybe I could layer this yellow with this green to get that light green that I need. So this gives you just a true sense of what the actual colors are. They are not going to match what's on the caps. Like, I'm telling you, 9 times out of 10. Probably your Copics will, just because they're Copics, but any other marker, they don't really take the time to do that. So I just don't want you to be like, oh yeah, this is a yellow green, and take this out and color it, and it is a yellow green, but maybe it's a darker, like more like an olive yellow green, and you were looking more for a yellow green or something. Like, if you're really into like using palettes, like combinations of colors, and you're trying to be very color specific and color matching, you want distinguishable markers that you can swatch. And for me, that's 99.9% of what I color is looking for specific colors. So swatching is absolutely critical for me, and I just highly recommend that anyone do that. If you're going to be wanting to use specific colors or use these for color by numbers, just because the caps don't always match. And here we are at an hour, and how I laughed when I said 20 minutes, 30 minutes. I should have known better, but that's okay. I'm going to break this up into parts, I think. I'm going to do another intro where I tell you guys all this, so you will have already heard all I'm about to say. But there are going to be jumps in the description where you can go to different sections of the video if you're interested. There's no way I could break this out further, because then this would be 5 parts long, and I don't really want to do that. Most people could have listened to this while they're coloring, so we'll go with this. Hopefully this won't be too long. You can just always come back and listen to different parts too. So yeah, that was a lot, and we still have a lot of stuff that we can talk about, surprisingly. I know, right? So yeah, hopefully this was helpful. This in part was particularly just, hey, somebody's thinking about trying alcohol markers. What do I look at? What do I do to start off with? What part 2 is going to be about are my coloring, like getting really specific into demo coloring and coloring tips and tricks. Like, we're going to color a couple pages probably on Amazon paper, because if you can make it work on Amazon paper, you can make it work anywhere else, in my opinion. There are always exceptions to that, but I'll be demoing some of these markers on Amazon paper, showing you guys how I color on the paper to get the results I do. We're going to also just go over overall, some extra tips about markers. I also have one question I do want to talk about, which is, maybe you've already bought that Magic Box marker set, or you've bought a budget-friendly set, and you're getting really frustrated because even though you've been practicing and practicing, you're still getting the streaks and stuff. And of course, you still want to use the markers up, but I have a few thoughts on that, like what you can do with them to use them up, and so we can talk about that. But I also want to hear from y'all, if possible, if you have any other questions that I could cover. in that video, then we'll do that. That one will hopefully be shorter than this one. But I just realized, it took an hour to cover all this, and so I'm like, yeah, this would have been 5 videos had I stretched it out, so better to just get it all. I'm efficient. I like to do things efficiently. Um, but let me know if you have any other questions in regards to alcohol markers that I didn't cover. And I will try to cover them in part 2. If I feel like I'm getting a lot of questions, I will probably put that one off to the following Monday, which will be the last Monday of the month, the 28th. Just because I want to get enough time for everybody to be able to ask questions. If I'm not getting a lot of questions, then I'll probably just go ahead and do the part 2 on like Wednesday or something. We'll see. But yeah, part 2 is going to be taking all this knowledge and actually putting it to use on paper. And so yeah, I had a lot of fun with this. It's long and I'm sorry. It's just who I am as a person. But hopefully this was super useful information, and will help other people when making decisions about these. I really do. They are a bit of a dramatic child. It's a bit, alcohol markers are a bit of a dramatic children. Um, they are dramatic children when it comes to coloring books, but I feel like that's the way of a lot of mediums, and a lot of it is practice, to be quite honest. It took me a long time to get where I really enjoyed using markers, and even now I run into problems like I still buy the budget markers, and then I'm like, why am I getting these streaks? They're driving me crazy. So that's why I'm passing this knowledge on to you, so maybe you don't make the same mistakes I did when I started. But I have so much fun with them. They're just so easy to use. Not really. I mean, now you're like, they're not easy, but they're easy for me just because I have hand and wrist problems. Pencils I get so impatient. Pencils just take so long. And as you could see, I do enjoy using pencils over markers. And I do enjoy using them, but it just saves me so much time when I can do a marker page in a day or two, when pencil could take me twice that time to 3 times that amount of time. So, yeah. So part 2, we're going to use Cali Arts. We're going to try the Arctics. We're going to try the Ohuhus. I bought a fresh set of Ohuhus just so we can look at them entirely. We're trying out some different types of markers, and how I color. So no, that'll probably be another hour. I'm going to try out the towel trees. And I'll probably stay away. I'll show you guys the magic box markers just to use as our budget marker example. I'll probably use some Copics, but again, those come with the thing that not all papers created equal, and that goes for the other markers as well. But anyway, we're going to use a variety of markers. I'm going to show you guys how I color with them, different things I do with them when I'm feeling lazy, and I don't know if I'll have time to do any actual blending, and if we do, it's probably going to be on premium paper, because blending is a bit of a it's very challenging in Amazon books, though we might still try it, who knows. Anyway, all right, I'm done. I'm going to wrap this up. My notes page, all this I'm going to make available through Google Docs, so that way you guys, like, I gave a lot of information, and I, like I said, I went to school to get certified to be a teacher once, and I feel like having notes are important, and that way you guys can see what I talked about today, and be able to utilize that if you can't remember something I said and you don't want to have to go back in the video, which I completely get. But yeah, let me know if this was helpful in the comments. Let me know if you have any outstanding questions about alcohol markers. I know you guys would probably want me to test like every marker that's out there, but like, I seriously, I don't need any more markers. I got the Cali Arts and the Ohuhus because I can always use more oranges and greens and stuff like that, and I'd hate to have to break out my Copics unless I'm doing actual blending work. But like, I have two sets of the Magic Box markers. I have so many different types of markers, and I don't want to just have some dry out or anything. So we're going to have at least one contender from each level, and we're going to have multiples from the mid-range. So that way you guys, since I think that's the best one to go with when using markers and coloring books, in most coloring books, then that's one we're going to test the most from. So anyway, hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you have a really good start to the week. And like I said, we will see what the reaction to this video is, and you will get a part 2, but it may be Wednesday. You know what? We're just going to say next Monday. Okay. Anyway, thanks guys for watching, and bye for now.